hiking, walking, hunting especially. I really like hunting.
God, did not expect that.
A switch gets...
As a UK person, he's carrying like this sniper-looking piece of equipment.
When I'm emotional, basically take all the negative emotions. Self-loathing can be one of them. And then add on top the old bane of being able to hear everything at the same time, at the same volume, at the same level. And everything just collapses.
With a lot of the kids and young adults, I talk about that you have superpowers. It's just a matter of learning how to harness them, using them to your advantage. You can use them for good, or you can use them for not so good. When you use them for good, the sky's the limit.
I've actually been building a sort of inner fantasy world in my head since I was about 17. I call it Vale. It's a really beautiful place.
CGI.
When I was diagnosed at the age of 11, I fell into a depression because I thought I was different than anybody else. I would choose not to have Asperger's syndrome if I could choose not to have it.
In April of 2019, a YouTube channel called Neurolushia posted a video, a documentary series called Through Our Eyes, Living with Asperger's, which is a 50-minute extended one that we're going to be having a look into today. As I said, and as I do say in a lot of my streams that I do, make sure to check them out, and they will be down in the description. And if you have or do enjoy this stream, please make sure to go and give them some love, give them a like, subscribe, drop something in the comments just to help them out with the algorithm. Are you ready? Let's go for it.
I'm different from other people. But in spite of that, I've adapted well. I'm one of those Aspies who've learned how to socialize, make friends, and blend in. I still can't socialize as much as I'd like to, and I miss out on a lot. I have to take it easy to preserve my energy, and I can't even go out in public sometimes because I'm very vulnerable to sensory overload. I often have a hard time understanding other people because how I experience the world is different. I may still be human, but sometimes I feel like I'm from another planet.
I think that's a very common thing for a lot of... It's a pretty common thing for a lot of autistic people to experience. So that feeling of alienation. I've heard about, in my own particular experiences, I did have some degree of like delusions when I was a kid to sort of cope with the school system. Even though I was diagnosed at 10 years old, I did feel that perhaps the description of autism that psychologists and my parents give me didn't really cover every aspect of being autistic, particularly like the emotional aspect of it. And yeah, I don't know if you guys had the same experience, but I've heard a lot of people, you know, sort of thinking that they are an alien or from a different planet. And you may have also been aware of the type of language that they've used. Asperger's. I know some people within the autistic community want to kind of have it erased, and it makes sense because Asperger's is no longer a thing unless you have been diagnosed with it. But I do think that some people like the label, and who am I to judge? Hello, Catcher. A mild form of autism, not opposed to spicy autism.
I'm Alyssa.
My name is Katie McKellar.
My name is Matthew Rhodes.
I am Demi.
My name is Bram.
My name is Adam Older.
My name is Miranda.
And I have Asperger's syndrome.
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 I have PDD and OS.
And I have autism.
I just find it so funny how people in America say Asperger's. Oh my god. Seems to be all very, very good topics.
It's been been agreed that a lot of the main features of Asperger's would include sensory issues, social deficits, obsessive interests, and repetitive behaviors.
Well, communicational. I think some people lump communication into the social aspect, but they are sort of two different aspects of autism too. So we missed the intro, someone catch it. We're watching a documentary called Through Our Eyes. My sensory overload looks different. It's not a phase in and out to white, more of a slow fade and continuous white. Interesting. Yeah, Asperger. My God. I don't know. I think maybe that's the right way of saying it, because isn't it like a German word? Not too sure. Might be the actual right way of saying it, to be honest.
With the sensory issues, our senses tend to be heightened. So things like lights, sounds, textures of food, certain fabric on clothing can be overwhelming to us. As for the social issues, because of the sensory problems, it makes it hard for us to read nonverbal cues and body language. It's just hard to pay attention to that when you're already so overwhelmed with other things.
I think that is definitely an element of like why autistic people might struggle with the social aspects, but I don't think it's the only thing, you know. I think definitely it doesn't help if you're in a social situation. There's lots of environmental noise going on about, but like there's definitely other stuff behind that.
As for obsessive interests, a lot of Aspies tend to be very focused while engaging with what we're interested in. And repetitive behaviors might appear as doing things over and over or fidgeting a lot. And a lot of these seem to come about as a way to cope with the outside world. I actually know...
Well, that's a lot to do with like the idea of autistic sort of monotropism that we've all heard so much about very, very recently. Kind of the idea that we sort of are drawn very intensely into focusing on one thing and find it hard to sort of deviate from that very said thing. But the routine, sort of the repetitive action, sort of characterized when it comes to autism, I think covers both routine, transitions, changes. The repetitive sort of behaviors kind of comes in terms of stimming as well. Perhaps some of the behaviors that we might have, because to a certain degree, routine is an element of repetitiveness. I'm very bad at detecting alternative motives. It's usually why I find... I mean, I can myself. I find it quite... I practice my cognitive empathy, my indirect sort of communication skills for a very, very long time, a large part of my life. And I can kind of tell, but I usually gravitate towards animated TV shows and films because you don't, like, the emotions and the intentions of people are usually displayed quite outright. Like, there's no... When I watch something which has actual human beings in acting, it takes a lot of mental energy from me, you know. It's just not a comfortable watch, although it can be a good watch. It's just a little bit too much. Yeah, I'm a German native speaker and they pronounce it totally wrong. How are you supposed to pronounce it, Moonlight? Henley, how much are you around people and social around people on average every week? Good question. I see my parents pretty much every day. I go to the gym or go to Muay Thai classes at least 5-6 times a week. So I'm sort of around people. And now and again, I'll sort of see friends, go out and do stuff. But it's very, very infrequent. Most of the time, it's usually like calls and video chats and stuff like that. Good question, though. Yeah, I love anime and cartoons. I think that's something that I've seen as an interest for a lot of autistic people.
I actually know a lot of people on the autism spectrum. Many of them are very good friends of mine. You know, I thought, because I know all these people, you know, maybe I should ask them about their lives and see how they all differ from one another and how we all can relate as well as Aspies. The first Aspie I talked to was my friend Katie. I had met Katie through my 4-H club when we were both homeschooled, and she's been one of my best friends ever since.
Before I knew what I was dealing with, that I had Asperger's, I thought I was the modern equivalent of the village idiot. I thought it was me. I thought I was something wrong with the world. Once I found out that I had Asperger's, as well as a few other learning disabilities, made me realize maybe I wasn't screwed up. Maybe it was just the fact that my brain was wired a little differently and people just had to deal with it.
I think that's quite a common thing that I've heard from people as well. You can kind of feel sometimes like, I mean, if you go through your entire life in lots of different circumstances, social situations, and you're always the one that people don't agree with when it comes to like your own perspectives on things or preferences in communication, and so sometimes even to a certain extent, our delayed processing can come across as perhaps being a bit sort of unintelligent to a certain degree, but it's definitely not like that, you know. I think a lot of us can hold a lot of self-esteem, self-image issues that are sort of derived from our longer-term experiences or early life experiences around people, especially if we don't know that we're autistic. More like Uspargar. Interesting. You prefer hamburgers. Oh my god. People don't deal with it though. They want nothing to inconvenience them. It doesn't help how closely society has pushed down the median person to collapse. 100%. Yeah, it's a bit of a weird one, isn't it? Because on the one hand, when you talk to people about you tell someone that you're autistic, you say, I'm different, I'm an autistic person, and they'll say, oh, you seem normal, you don't seem any different, and then they'll point out things that you do as being strange or odd, and then ask you why you're being strange and odd in these various different ways, and you're like, well, I'm autistic. that's what you're seeing, you know, these aspects of myself. It's a very strange cognitive dissonance, you know.
Autism is in my thought, it makes you special and it shows that you're different in cases. People with autism tend to be a little more hyper or quieter than most people that you would run into every day. I was diagnosed at the age of 3.
Wow.
And my parents didn't tell me until a little after I turned 6. When they told me, I thought it was a superpower. I was like, I'm a superhero! And then my parents explained it to me. And I found out then that I had to work really hard on showing that I'm more than a person with autism. And I've actually been pushing my hardest through everything that I've ever been in, from classes with friendships. People usually, when they meet me, they never know that I have it. So I am somewhat happy about it because I have a mild case of it, so nobody can tell that I have it. So that's a plus for me.
Yeah. I think that the term for that is passing, I think. It's used in a lot of different diversity communities, but yeah. I've heard about, it used to be talked about more in the context of passing rather than masking. Because it generally is the same thing to a certain degree, but it's I think passing is more the result and masking is more the sort of the active effort. And I think viewing it in terms of this idea of like, oh, you've passed, like it's a good thing that you've sort of, people can't tell that you're autistic, I think inherently sort of edges more on the negative interpretation. If that makes sense. Most people can't see the view from different points of view in life to have empathy and see it from other people's views. Yeah, I think a lot of people do struggle. I mean, that's where the whole double empathy concept has come from, because, you know, I don't think it's necessarily that we can't relate to others or empathize with others, but it's just different, and it's quite hard to indeed relate and empathize if you don't have much awareness or understanding or experience with a person who has a different brain to you. You know, you pass for sure, but people do think I'm kiddish if I open up to them, feel more comfortable around them, because I get excited easily, and I'm the one who's bad at sarcasm and stuff. Yeah, I mean, I don't mask, but I definitely pass. You know, Most people don't know that I'm autistic. I mean, you guys know. I mean, it's pretty obvious, like, from the name of my channel on my cover, but, you know. I do not feel I could ever appreciate what others experience when they interact with me. Yeah, passing depends on more than masking, 100%. It's more of like the sort of the thing, and masking is what you do to kind of pass, you know, so it's like the end result, I guess. Don't recommend it if you can. Sensory issues.
Most of my Asperger's symptoms are sensory related, so I'm really sensitive to fluorescent lights and bass from speakers,
Ooh, I love that
certain
one.
types of voices and tones of voices.
I knew that somebody was going to get me. Oh. Yes, have you guys got this experience that you can't be friends, you can't be acquaintances, or you don't want to be friends with people who they have a voice that just doesn't mesh well with your ears? It's so exaggerated. I think it has to be to a certain degree. It's very hard to superimpose like what sensory experiences can be like, but I think one thing that they did miss out is that, you know, it's not always hypersensitive. It can look very different, although there are some trends in people being hypersensitive, particularly to noise and light. It's a very individual thing though. Yes, I feel like such a bad person for it, but some voices are so shrill and it makes you feel like tinfoil. I like that comparison. Makes me feel like pear skin. It's not weird voices, it's just some voices that it just doesn't mesh well with my ears.
One of Katie's Asperger's symptoms that was the most noticeable to me was her sensitivity to sound.
Sound, that was pretty big. That was a pretty bad one. That's probably why I don't remember most of it. It drove me crazy quite a lot. The idea of being in a room with a loud band, or people talking too loudly, or sounds happening outside the door. I couldn't ignore anything. Everything was right there, right in front of me. I could not tell my brain to shut off anything. I would hear clocks, I'd hear flies, I'd hear people screeching little pencils on paper, or things clattering on the floor. All of it was at the exact same time. Not being able to filter it out is horrible. That's just...
Well, that's the concept that they're talking specifically here is habituation, which is something that a lot of people do, a lot of animals, organisms do, where you basically to some degree acclimatize and filter out things which are consistent in your environment. So a lot of people, when they enter a busy place, after a little bit of time, the busyness of the place starts to quieten down a little bit in their sort of attention field. But for autistic people, it can be really, really hard to filter out everything, which is why it can be so distracting to us in social situations. I used to get anxiety from certain sounds. Flies do it for me. That's why I cringed at that one. Yeah, but it can be super intense. I like to describe the noise hypersensitivity as sort of running through. If anybody's an audiophile out there who likes tinkering with audio and songs and stuff, it's kind of like putting a compressor on everything, or like amplifying it, the sound just a tad. People get this wrong as it being some kind of superhuman ability that we actually have more sensitive ears, but it's less about the actual inputs from the noise, and it's more about what our brain does with the information, you know. Hyperactivity seems so important that if I don't have it but somehow still qualified as autistic. Hyperactivity is more related to ADHD, but the majority of autistic people are ADHD, so it's not, I'm not hyperactive myself. I hate flies, they're disgusting and scary. Yeah. I just don't like anything that feels comfortable flying next to my ears, you know? It's not favourable.
That's just my experience from a classroom. which is why I was so happy to be homeschooled. It's, in some cases, I could say it literally saved my life. There are many
was not
things that I've
homeschooled.
worked on to the point that I don't notice them half the time, or majority of the time. And thank God that's one of them. I've gotten to the point where I can hear something going on, but I can say, no, I don't want to listen to that. The only time that really drives me crazy is when I'm trying to hear someone talking and there's a TV or radio in the background. I still have trouble with that. If there's a TV or a radio going on, my brain will decide it wants to listen to that instead of the person in front of me. Which is why I usually have to ask people to not play music or have the TV off or the radio off if they want to talk to me face to face without any complications. It kind of hurts me to have to ask people to turn off the things that are normally ambient sound to them.
Self-efficacy.
But for me, if I want to talk to you, that's what has to happen.
It's very
I've
quiet,
always
isn't
had a
it?
hard time.
I would actually increase the volume, but because some of the noises in here are very, very loud, I don't think that I should, because it might just catch us off guard a few times.
I'm fitting into church communities, but it was mainly because of my sensory issues. You know, because I was so overwhelmed with just being there, it made it even harder for me to attempt to connect with people. As for my friend Katie, she even had a harder time, and I asked her about it, and it made me realize that a lot of us Aspies deal with the same kind of thing when we go to places like even church, where it's supposed to feel safe and welcoming.
I very much enjoy going to church, hearing the sermons, praise. I love it. Only problem was, well, I said I liked praise, but that's where my major problem came in. It doesn't necessarily have to be loud. It doesn't particularly have to have a lot of bass. It's hard to describe what it is, but it somehow just gets into your head and won't let up. To any churches out there, I know you are doing your best to give a wonderful praise experience, but if the person is in pain from the fact that they're listening to your praise music, please stop. Turn it down. You don't have to have it at level 11 all the time.
Social difficulties.
I also do deal with some of the social issues. I do have a hard time reading people. I cannot stand small talk because I really want to get to know people, and I do not really have a lot of practice with getting past the small talk stage.
Yeah. I think what they're talking about reading people, that's along the lines of that cognitive empathy, the ability to sort of read someone's emotional state and sort of interpret the ways that they say things, sort of the tonality that they use, the facial expressions, the body language. And also, when it comes to small talk, relate. I got pretty good at, I can do small talk. Like, I'm able to do it. I don't want to. It's really boring. Like, it just grates on me. It feels like a chore. You know, like, when I want to have social communication with people, you know, I like it to be something interesting. I have a hard time when someone, especially a woman, overemphasizes the S sound. Pretty good at small talk, but sometimes I just don't want to do it because I don't always have the energy to be interacting with people. Yeah, I mean, it's like a chore, isn't it? To a certain degree. Like, I've been trying to understand, I mean, for a long time, different aspects of neurotypicals, you know, so I kind of went for a long time trying to understand more about autism. When I sort of got to the end of like all the concepts and sort of understood them from my own point of view, started having a really big interest in neurotypicals and how they worked. Around about the time that I started masking as well, I would say. But I think small talk is, you know, it serves some function. It's not just useless to a certain degree. I think the main function that it provides is it shows the other person that you're willing to waste time to interact with them, even if it's about things that are not interesting. Sort of like a social validation type thing. another useful aspect of it is that you can use it to probe a little bit into things that you perhaps might want to speak about more in depth. Usually the way that I go about small talk is I will do the hi, how are you? Oh, how's your day been so far? How you feeling? All that kind of thing. And then I'll be like, oh, just mention something about my day. Just say like, oh, I watched this YouTube video today. It was quite interesting. It was all about existentialism, you know. And if they find it interesting, I'll be like, okay, cool. Then we continue talking about it. If they don't, I try another thing. I'm like, oh yeah, well, I went to watch your video about existentialism, and then, you know, I went to do some Muay Thai, and I'll be like, oh, I don't do Muay Thai, but I do a bit of boxing, and I'm like, oh, how's that going for you? You know, talk about something a little bit more interesting than the weather. The very least, my father, myself, my late husband, and all our daughters are autistic. Spent years driving a lot of autistic kids. You've got an instinctive understanding of autism. Interesting. Neurotypical here, don't do small talk. I'm a hypersensitive introvert, and I can't be arsed with most people. Fair enough, Karina. Well, welcome. I'm happy that this is a neurodiverse community. So we've got lots of autistic people and ADHDers and neurotypicals. We're a very, you know, you're welcome here, Karina. Can we do a documentary about neurotypicals from our point of view? I suppose we could do. I think it's one of the difficult things, isn't it? Because it's like talking about it in that angle is relatable to a lot of autistic people, but at the same time, kind of making jokes about people who aren't autistic, it doesn't really do us many favors, you know, in a sense, you know, to sort of speak it in that way. I mean, I've had a lot of experiences. I do have friends, and family who are neurotypical, and I love them. They're different. Like, it's cool. Like, do you also need to diagnosis if you're neurotypical? It just means that you don't have any differences in your brain, basically. Or in the context of autism, some people use it to say that you're not autistic. But the more accurate term is holistic. The reason why I don't use holistic too much is because people ask me what is being holistic. So I just make it a little bit more accessible to people.
I tend to find it easier to socialize on the internet, so chat rooms are my ideal social setting.
On a role play.
It's a lot easier for me to pay attention to what people are saying when it's in chat form, because I can read it. Yeah. If I missed something they said, I can look back at what it was. And there's also no overwhelming stimuli to get in the way. Yeah. Though my social skills have...
Here's the thing, I don't like texting, you know? I don't enjoy it. It's not my favorite. I understand that. Like, I can usually process and sort of communicate a bit sort of more laid back, but I do love talking to people. I mean, in-person communication is my favorite, but video calls, close second, voice calls, probably texting is probably my least favorite. Thomas, I know that head movements you do as a stim. I remember you bring that up. Yeah, have you noticed since I told you? It just happens. I just like, every time that I talk, I'm like tilting my head side to side. Kind of makes me look a bit odd, I think, to most people. The way that I deal with small talk is I just ask loads of questions, get them to talk about themselves. Boring, but at least I do not have to talk about me. Good idea. Very good idea. You prefer texting? Interesting. Your least favorite is video calls. I suppose the other element of video calls is that you've got to see yourself. Like, you see yourself when you video call, you know. It makes me look autistic. I don't know. I'd never heard of other autistic people talk about tilting their head to regulate themselves. Now it's cute, and when your bangs were longer, it looked emo. Oh.
Skills haven't always been the greatest. I've worked to improve them enough to seem quote-unquote normal. The way I act in public, and even in this film, is a result of a lot of practice, because that does not come naturally. Even for this documentary, I still had to interact with people. If I wanted to take this journey and to do it well, I had to put myself out there and get to know more people. One person I decided to meet with was Patty Boheme, the Executive Vice President of Little Friends Center for Autism. She explained a lot about the Asperger's symptoms, including social issues.
Social
When
differences.
we get into social communication, some of it is we have issues where people are very concrete in their thinking, so they take things really literally. And it's hard for them to think about another person's perspective. So a lot of times it's difficult for them to understand things socially because it's so hard to understand what somebody else might be thinking.
Yeah. I mean, it's not really an issue when you're talking to other autistic people, is it, though, really? Because we don't tend to be ones to use a lot of indirect communication. It's never really a problem. There's going to be a bit of medical speak here, I think.
We can't use sarcasm in my house without me taking it seriously. And I'm gullible, so watch out for that.
Yeah, me too.
I tend to be a bit of a chatterbox, and it's hard for me to clearly speak because I tend to slur my words a bit, but I try not to, so I've been working on that. I actually can less talk, but I still have to work on my volume because I tend to have pitchy times where I'm really loud. Say hello to the tree!
Interesting. I've never had an issue with making emo bang swing emoji. Okay, I'll log it for later. Yeah, never had an issue with talking too loudly. Always have an issue with talking too quietly. You don't really get a good sense for it through listening to me talking to a microphone, but I speak very, very quietly. Only because of myself. Like, it's not something related to me being shy or anything like that, because I'm really not. But my own voice, if I speak too loudly, hurts my ears. It overstimulates me. So if I put my earbuds in, usually I speak a lot more loudly. So when I do my presentations, I can often deliver the presentation to a pretty large room without a microphone. And that's because I play very, very loud music in my ears. Yeah, slap that like button. Thank you. Thank you, Jackie. If you're enjoying it so far, peeps. You're not looking autistic enough, Thomas. I demand that you look up more autistic immediately. I will try. I will try. Oh, I hate it when holistics think I'm shy just because my voice is too low. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of ways that they can interpret autistic behaviors and traits as various personality traits. This kind of goes with the territory, doesn't it? Doing autism now. Hi. That's my attempt.
It's very hard to make friends or try to keep them because when you don't know how to catch social cues, it kind of ruins the friendship, and it makes me have a really hard time with me being me and them not getting it. I can't seem to have a successful relationship. Let's put it this way, it's not easy to have a boyfriend when you don't catch him getting mad at you.
Yeah.
You ask me what Asperger's.
But I think that's a really significant part of it, but it's got to find the right person, you know? Got to give it some time. Thank you for joining the channel, somebody. For some reason it's not showing in my little thing. I don't know what's wrong with my stream elements today. I can go for days without actually speaking if there's nothing to speak about. Me too. Me too.
Asperger's syndrome is. It's a
Hello,
disorder. It's a social learning disorder that it means what it says it is. It causes people to have difficulty socializing. I guess I just listed a deficit I have. And another one I have is formulating sentences, which is included in thinking of sentences for this interview.
Hello. No.
It's hard to join into large groups of people and, like, join their conversation. It's easy to start a conversation, but to join one, it's just, I can't do it that well. My biggest obstacle I have overcome with having Asperger's syndrome is approaching people I don't know very well. A few years ago, there was no way I could do it, but today, I could do it very easily.
Good lad.
At college, I've been able to make some really good friends. One of them is actually an Aspie. Her name is Demi, and I was actually really surprised to learn that she was an Aspie because I didn't think I'd come across another one on the campus. Ever since I met her, though, I've been hanging out with her a lot.
Are they playing a GameCube? Oh my god. I can't remember the last time I played on a GameCube. I've never actually had one. I played GameCube games on the Wii because there was like an attachment that you could do for that one. I played Pokemon Colosseum. That was a good one. Oh, no problem, Anine. Have a good sleep, my friends. Hopefully see you around again. Sorry for oversharing. No, it's all good, Jan. Share away, you know? We all support each other. You're being censored again. You're getting on my... Does Marvin not give you some level of, like, idea of what you've done? Or does he just kick you out? Lived on the streets when the GameCube came out. You lived on the streets. I'm sorry to hear that. Hello, Aurora. Welcome on the kick side of things. Good, good. Are you another person? Are you a person who is nice and who's wanting to engage in some interesting autism content? Or do you want to sell me something? Because that seems to be the only thing that I get on the kick side of things nowadays.
Not likely.
I tend to have a sensitivity to sound. I have difficulty communicating with others, especially formally. I have a few difficulties in my schoolwork, and I do get tired from socializing pretty easily. Back in middle school, I was bullied quite a bit. When it came to having friends, I was the socially awkward person. I did have a group back in the first 2 years. The group that I was in, it just got bigger and bigger, filling up with people that either I did know, but at the same time, he was unsure of, and people that I didn't know, and it just got way too much, so I ended up splitting from the group completely.
I've had that.
My Asperger's would include inability to discern facial expressions, situations, see when someone is clearly annoyed with me or clearly wanting to help me, but I'm not helping. Communication is more than just what we say.
Yeah.
It's the words we use, the inflections we put on them, the tone of voice, the hand gestures we use, the way our bodies are positioned, the way we use eye contact or lack thereof.
I mean, I think this is all relevant when speaking about communication for most people, but I don't really see it in my experience as an issue when communicating with other autistic people. It tends to be very direct, you know. Can kind of it's kind of nice. You can kind of like shut off your eye contact. You can just kind of chill out and relax in your normal posture and just not worry about that stuff and just talk back and forth in a very direct way, you know. Apple and Android don't communicate well. Uncanny Valley.
There's things that Aspies have to learn that most people will just pick up naturally. When I was a little kid, I don't think I really paid much attention to the outside world. It was just kind of like what was going on in here. But the more I grew up, the more I started to realize the world was there, and the more my conscience seemed to take things farther and farther into extremes. Like, I'll be talking to somebody, and when I finally stop talking, well, this is how my conscience views it at least, it'll start, like, very harshly verbally berating me for talking too long or talking too much about myself or not asking them enough about who the other person is and what they want to talk about. It just goes on.
I mean, it's very in line with the sort of shame that we can often feel, particularly when it comes to that. But they shouldn't feel shame because it's just their natural communication style. Sadly, a lot of people can call us out for that difference that we have socially, and can be quite unfortunate in a lot of situations and kind of make us learn that, and you know, eventually it becomes like a part of our sort of own sort of self-consciousness to a certain degree, you know, constantly correcting yourself even if there's no need to. It's making sure, you know, making sure that you apologize just in case. I wouldn't even classify it as well, maybe it is a form of people pleasing to a certain degree, but I wouldn't classify it in the same sort of realm, the same sort of bubble, in a sense. Pretty sure autistic friendship is quite different from what NTs think it is. Trying to flesh that out more fully, but I think you guys know what I mean. Yeah. It's basically just like direct communication usually, from my experience, and it's just nice, and zen, 100%. Yeah, I think there is also, as well with the self-consciousness, there's a lot of social paranoia that we can feel, even if social situations go well, if we're so used to them not going well and people calling us out for our differences, we're going to sort of exist in this sort of state of paranoia that perhaps we did something wrong, or perhaps they didn't like me in this way, and it's to a certain degree exacerbated, especially when you don't. It's not as easy for you to interpret those indirect signs of communication that people give off. It'd be a very complex world.
On and on and on about things that I did not do, things that other people around me will give 2 seconds thought to and then just move on. My conscience will remind me about for the next 2 weeks, maybe a month.
After I learned that Katie had Asperger's, I felt like I could relate to her even more than I already did. It's nice knowing that someone else deals with the same uncommon struggles that I do. Aside from Katie, I had Aspie friends in other places too, like my friend Matt, who I met on an Aspie support group on Facebook.
Rock, paper, scissors. Rock. Darn.
Matt lived only a few states
definitely
away,
cheated.
so we decided to meet up in person so I can get to know him better, and to also ask him about his experiences with Asperger's.
I was pretty happy about my diagnosis, really. For me, it was kind of this realization that, yes, I'm different, but there's a reason for me being different.
Yeah.
For me, Asperger's has always been mostly the social issue. I never fit in as a kid, got made fun of a lot,
as a
got picked on. Well, I grew up, I didn't know anybody else with Asperger's, so I kind of felt like an outcast. So I learned to mimic neurotypical people so I could at least blend in, so I wouldn't stick out as much. Yeah. A lot of people with Asperger's syndrome, empathy tends to be sort of an issue. And I guess for me it was, but basically, like other Aspies, I've had to use my detective skills in order to watch neurotypical people, see how they interact with the world, so that way I can appear to be a little more normal.
Yeah, I think what they're talking about is the cognitive empathy aspect of it, which in the lay sort of perspective, mainstream perspective of empathy, is not actually what it is. So it's very incorrect sort of characterization of autism being lacking empathy. But I've talked about it so many other times on these streams that we've done. Seems like a really nice guy. It really gets me right here when people start talking about school. Even if it's just flippantly, I'm like, oh, what kind of bull have you had to deal with in your life, and why? Why has this happened to us so often? But yeah, I mean, for me, when I found out that I was autistic, I mean, even when I was 10 years old, I noticed that there was differences between myself and other people. And I was very aware of it, even at that very young age. And it made a lot of sense to me, and it made me feel seen when my mom told me about it, 100%. I can go over things years later in my mind, which usually happens late at night. Same, I always felt different as far back as I can remember. It's weird how it's not like you can put a finger on why, but even as kids, like we can tell that there's something different, about us. Yeah. Thomas, your community makes me feel seen. Oh, I'm really glad. Super, super glad. I'm glad that I can provide that for you guys. Although, to be honest, you guys support each other a lot more than I really have a hand in. You're lovely people.
Normal. I've read a lot of guides on body language to help fill in the blanks in social situations. And I found out that apparently sitting, with your arms crossed like this, it's to close yourself off from people, show that you're not interested. And I think back on it, and this is probably my favorite way to sit. It's the most comfortable, and I had this real.
It also reduces anxiety to have that closed body language. That's why people do it. Like it's. I mean, there's some like yoga poses that people do which sort of are supposed to increase confidence. They're all about sort of opening your body up. Sounds weird. But also, if you take a position which is very sort of hunched over and closed off, it can regulate a lot of anxiety. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, I guess, in a sense. But I really don't like a lot of these guys' perspectives on it. Like, not that I'm trying to say that they're wrong or anything. It's just it hurts my soul a little bit when they sort of think that they have to change themselves when they're just so nice and just great human beings as they are. They feel that they have to do that. Back at you, Thomas. Thank you. You tend to ignore me mostly, or Marvin sin bins my comments. I don't intentionally. I'm sometimes not very good at keeping up with the chat. I'm not a jealous person. I just get angry that my needs are always overlooked. Yeah, it can be difficult. My ADHD dad has a pub. He's in his late 70s. How? I have no idea. I mean, it's just, like autism. I mean, quite often a lot of autistic people are introverted, but not all of us. Some people are very extroverted. I'm kind of in the middle.
This realization, that's why I don't have a blossoming social life.
My Aspie friends, both in person and on the internet, weren't the only ones who helped me deal with my Asperger's. I'd have to say that my biggest support would be my mom. She went back to school to study psychology so she could help people like me and their families. Through her, I've met other psychologists like Dr. Wahlberg, an expert on autism spectrum disorders. I decided to pay a visit to his clinic to ask him more about his perspective on Asperger's.
One of the things that I've learned in what I do is personality comes first with all the kids that I see, whether they're on the spectrum or not. Personality comes first, diagnosis comes second. It's like, I tell people, it's like saying everybody with diabetes is this. They behave this way, they think this way, their personality is this way. That's not true.
I don't know if it's my bias just towards medical professionals that we see on these streams. He seems like a lovely chap. But yeah, I do agree with them to some degree, but the conflation with diabetes makes absolutely no sense as a concept. Like, one's about your pancreas, the other one's like a difference in your brain. I think the lines between personality and autism, it's a difficult one to separate, but yeah, I mean, it's not everything about a person, 100%, or else all autistic people would indeed be the same, which we aren't. No way I could present and keep up with the chat at the same time. Just ask my trainees, lol. I tell them to just unmute and speak up if they have a question, because I won't know otherwise. I think I'm getting used to it. It's hard sometimes, especially if my brain's working a bit slower than usual. Ooh, you got an autistic extrovert. You know some autistic extroverts. Interesting. A lot of us are NFJ. Yeah, that's me. Nearly 50 here. What, in likes? Yeah, like the stream. I was just going to click off, but I realized that I haven't done that yet. Forgot to.
True. It's the same for those on the spectrum. Personality comes first. So I have plenty of kids that I see on the spectrum that are introverted, which is, I think, some of the stereotypical, wants to sit in his room or her room and play on the computer, doesn't want to interact with people. That's half the kids I see. But the other half are extroverted. The other half want to be around other people, want to engage with other people.
Do you think that maybe the prevalence of introversion amongst autistic people is a result of our brain, or is it a result of our environment to a certain degree? I'd probably say that it's probably like a mix of the two, because like if you just struggle to get on with neurotypical individuals, it's going to be hard to find socializing as easy, and there's going to be a lot of social anxiety and things like that related, sort of mixed in there. So perhaps there's an environmental effect, possibly. You think it's the environment more than the brain? Interesting.
One of the most important things to realize is that people who have autism, whether it's high functioning autism or severe autism, and if you have in your brain, you know, what a person with Asperger's would be, is I think the most important thing is this is a person, and every person is so different.
So at about 3 years of age, kids start to really pay attention to other kids around them, the social environment. I think with individuals on the spectrum, if they're overwhelmed by the environment, they're trying to tune it out. They're trying to manage it as opposed to taking it in. So I think they kind of head in an opposite direction.
It's hard.
Yeah, maybe. That does make a little bit of sense. I think it's, you know, generally when we get to that, you know, 8 to sort of 12 kind of age, I think a lot of people start to take off a lot when it comes to their own sort of, like with the social stuff. It just tends to ramp up very, very quickly around those ages and becomes a bit isolating for a lot of us. Before that, it's not really much of an issue, as I can see. Sometimes it is, but a lot of the time, I think the autistic kids that I've taught, they're kind of a bit sort of blissfully unaware that, you know, kids sort of see them as being a bit different. But Thomas, you had a good home life and are less introverted. I had a traumatic home life, and so I'm more by myself. Yeah, I had a good home life. I did. School life is another issue on its own. Though used to be quite a bubbly, kind of approachable kid, but secondary school did a bit of a number on me over the years. I think it's interesting, like, talking about this idea of like social progression amongst our peers, because it's quite interesting. It's kind of this relationship that I see in a lot of kids that I've known, is that they tend to be like intellectually and logically very gifted in comparison to their peers. Not all. It's not a prerequisite for autism, of course. But they tend to be developed a lot more on the logical side and be able to have a lot more sort of complex conversations with particularly adults. But at the same time, they sort of lag behind a little bit when it comes to socializing with the other kids, communicating with the other kids, and emotionally to a certain degree as well, the whole sort of regulation aspect. But it's interesting to think about, because it's kind of like for nerd, when I try to explain to, you know, with my presentations and stuff, when I talk to a neurotypical audience, it's, you know, the way that I like to describe it is that people sort of generally just transiently learn all of these social things. Whereas for us to understand and learn them, we actually need to be taught them, you know. So it's like they just kind of absorb all of this information and interpret it kind of more naturally than perhaps we would. I think it's the environment that triggers my mental health issues. Yeah, me too. Yeah. Although it was for me. Now it's more of a long-standing thing. I answered the MBTI questions as someone who tried to overcome my traits, such as trying to be more flexible. Interesting. Some days I feel social and want to interact. Some days I want to be around people. I don't want to be around people, but I don't necessarily want to interact. And some days I don't want to be around anyone at all. Interesting. Thomas, with autism, I don't get what pushes a person into diagnosis. Is it about the number of traits or how they are dysfunctional? Well, diagnosis and the medical system is there to diagnose problems. So if you're autistic and you don't have anything which stands out as an issue in your life related to autism, you don't tend to go and get an autism diagnosis, or it isn't necessarily picked up. But if you do, it's probably a lot more likely that you do. So that's why we have diagnoses. It's to sort of diagnose a problem that we have and try and help in fixing it. Although, to be honest, especially in adulthood, the support aspects of autism is a little bit lacking, isn't it? Sadly. Yeah, the number of traits, yeah, 100%. But generally, there is a problem in their life, you know, Because I know some autistic people, I mean, not diagnosed autistic, of course, but who just haven't really identified anything autism related that's been a problem for them, and so haven't gone and got a diagnosis because it's not really been anything that's been apparent to them. They could have some issues with it, 100%, but it's not picked up as something, or they haven't gone to a doctor about it, or they haven't talked about these issues, and so it's not diagnosed. Like, there's no digging that psychologists have done, or digging by themselves. I walked around my neighborhood with T-Rex arms. Interesting. I've never done the T-Rex arms. It's not really a me thing.
Hard for an Aspie to read nonverbal cues and body language because they're already so busy processing what's around them that it's just hard to pay attention to those things. As a result of that, it might be very hard for them to make friends. Conversations can be really awkward. They wouldn't be sure exactly what to do or say. It's hard for them to articulate what they're thinking sometimes or how they're feeling.
Processing. Ooh, emotions. It's getting interesting.
Probably the biggest negative effect of Asperger's for me has been pretty severe bouts of depression. I've gotten better at coping with it over time, but every once in a while there's a particularly bad one, and I just kind of shut down, I guess would be a good term for it. With my emotions, they're all pretty close together. I can go from happy to sad very quickly, and for just about anything. Like, I'll be happy, and then when I start to think about why I'm happy, I realize that stimuli that's making me happy may not always be there, and then I start to feel sad about that. Because of the poor social skills, I may not always realize when I'm around people that are a bad influence. And because of the interaction with those people and poor experience with them, I've been left with a lot of negativity, like a lot of self-doubt, just general anxiety over a lot of things.
Oh, God damn it. Oh. I wish you could be here with us. Yeah, me too. Oh my God. Oh, I hate that stuff's just so prevalent for us. Like, it's just so like... I really feel for him. It's tough. You okay, Thomas? Yeah, I'm okay. I'm just empathizing. Well, no, I'm not empathizing because autistic people supposedly don't empathize, do they? I'm not autistic, but this t-shirt is. Interesting. What did hit home?
When I was diagnosed at the age of 11, I fell into a depression because I thought I was different than anybody else. I would choose not to have Asperger's syndrome if I could choose not to have it, because socializing would be much easier.
There is times when my overwhelming bits come back. Usually it's when I'm tired or I've been through far too much for the day, or I'm over-emotional. When I'm emotional, basically take all the negative emotions. Self-loathing can be one of them. And then add on top the old bane of being able to hear everything at the same time, at the same volume, at the same level. And everything just collapses and I can't function anymore.
That's such a good description. The social, emotional aspects all kind of combining and overstimulating us. I think if I was isolated somewhere with only people I liked, I wouldn't have any problems in life. I think that's one of the big issues when it comes to school and workplaces. It's a closed social environment. So in adult life, to a certain degree, we have control over who we see and who are around to a certain degree. In closed social environments, we don't always have that luxury, you know. And sort of it allows people who aren't necessarily good for us to have close proximity with us regularly. You know, I spent so many hours studying my genome this weekend. Interesting. Videos have been very helpful. I believe it's called special interest. It is indeed. Very cool. You're studying your own genome. Is that from like Ancestry? 23andMe. I'd really love to do something like that. Like to socialize in small increments. Ha asks, would you guys say that the following is classic holistic? To always find some thing in between my words that I never meant or thought. Then they try to convince me that they know my thoughts better than I. Yes, it's a very holistic thing, I would say. Trying to find some indirect communication where there is none. Didn't know I was stimming for 36 years. Yeah. I mean, I'm still glad. I'm glad that you're still stimming, because for me, I stopped because I was just way too self-conscious about it. But I wish that I continued on, because it would have been very beneficial for me dealing with a lot of the emotions that I was having.
When it comes to emotional problems, I tend to prefer to handle them by myself, because I just don't think other people would get it, because I have different issues than most people. They also tend to be more complicated than just one thing. For instance, if I get home from college and when I'm at home, I could be overwhelmed by the presence of my family and not realize it. Or I could be hungry or tired or overstimulated. And for me, sometimes it's hard to figure out what is the source of what's distressing me. And then I'll end up feeling...
Yeah, I mean, just gave some real proper examples of alexithymia and interoception. Alexithymia being difficulty noticing and categorizing your emotions. Very, very large part of a lot of autistic people. Something that I'm actually going to be creating a video on presentation in just under a month. We'll be creating one. Sort of like a threshold condition to a certain degree. It's like the threshold for us noticing how we feel and what we feel is a little bit higher than for most people. So people will be able to tell sort of what they're feeling at sort of lower levels of perhaps a certain emotional state. Whereas for us, it can require it to be a bit higher before we actually notice it. And by that time, we can sometimes be a bit too overstimulated, a bit too emotionally dysregulated, and it can lead to a lot of shutdowns and meltdowns and such. The interoceptive aspect of that, basically a difficulty noticing your bodily signs, usually talked about in terms of hunger and thirst. Generally not too much of an issue, but can be an issue when it's combined with EDs, or if you get very, very dehydrated and you don't realize. Sometimes I'll go and just like start having some liquid and realize, my God, I am absolutely parched, is that the right word? Thirsted? Very, very thirsty. And just down like mass amounts of water, because I just hadn't realized just how dehydrated I was. And it can have some impacts on my emotional state and on everybody's emotional state and everybody's energy levels, I would say. So I have to wonder how to make someone get me. It is definitely 100 times more simple than reading between the lines, isn't it? But I kind of expected you just saying this because yada yada. I think it's obviously the best way of going about it is to say I don't communicate indirectly, and for people to understand what that means. But people are so used to social communication with a lot of indirect signs that it can be really difficult to do that. So usually you'll come across people who do speak a lot more directly, and you'll find that it's quite easy to communicate with them, but it's not the majority of people. Don't think I'm calling you out by nothing, something, and being Captain Obvious. Trying to find hostile intent between your words is something that an NPD or BPD might do. What are you talking about? Oh, right, yes. I don't think it's really related to that. I think if I'm not wrong, what they're talking about is just, you're having a conversation with someone and someone's thinking that you're trying to say something through your body language or your facial expressions, but you're actually not, and getting very confused at why you're not giving them any signs that they would usually get from most people, and trying to read into your words a little bit too much. It's a sign of a personality disorder. Not necessarily. I suppose trying to read into the deeper meaning behind why someone's saying stuff, I get that, but I feel like most people do. Like, they get a bit confused, they get a bit uncomfortable when they can't really characterize someone's indirect communication. Well, it seems like a lot of people are agreeing with the personality disorder aspect. Interesting. Might have to do a bit more reading on it. I suppose maybe I'm not communicating exactly what I mean fully. To tell you what I know, what you are thinking violates all kind of boundaries. Yeah, that aspect of it. Yeah, totally. Not an holistic thing, that. Not a good thing, indeed.
Feeling like a stupid, incompetent person for not being able to figure it out, because then it seems like I'm just being, over dramatic over nothing.
So much of what I see with those on the spectrum is rooted, a lot of it's rooted in anxiety because of all the changing things that are going on in the world. The older you get, the more you perceive how much you don't have control of, which creates a lot of anger and anxiety and depression in a lot of kids that I see and young adults that I see. I tell people emotions to begin with before therapy with a lot of kids on the spectrum is like a light switch. It's on or off, where I'm more like a dimmer switch. It takes me a while to get upset, and it also takes me a while to calm down. Where individuals on the spectrum, sometimes it's a light switch.
It's not a light switch. Like, it happens the same for us. Like, we have very, very similar. Well, I mean, to be honest, when it comes to cortisol, our cortisol does tend to rise and stay risen for a larger period of time, but it's not that. It's more about our perception of our emotional state. It's just requires a little bit more emotion for us to tell that it's there when we're alexithymic. So it's kind of a little bit of a not completely accurate, but I get what they're saying.
Light switch, which other people don't understand. And I think what starts to develop then is more of the black and white way of seeing things. So that's a way to control the environment, is to try to make it consistent. So if the sensory world's not making sense, I want other things in my environment to be the same. So it's really a control thing. The more they are overwhelmed and overstimulated, the more they try to control. So they don't want furniture in the house changing. They don't want different routes to school, because that's not fun.
I wouldn't say it's along the lines of control. I think it's more along the lines of consistency and certainty. But again, I see what they're saying. I'm probably just being way too finicky about what they're talking about because they're a medical professional. But I mean, to be honest, from the professionals that we've seen in some of the other videos that we watched, this guy seems like a solid one.
Fun. So the challenge with the social interaction in the social world is it's always changing. It's always evolving. You never know what's going to happen, what somebody's going to say, how they're going to react, how they're feeling that day. So a lot of times in therapy, what works really well is getting individuals to understand that with the black and white thinking, you can really use that to your advantage, because it's all or none. I can't be extremely anxious about something and extremely calm at the same time. The body can't do that. I can be in the middle, so a little bit anxious, but not overly anxious. So I try to get them to see a continuum to break things down, so then there's not such an overreaction to the change, so it doesn't get overwhelming when something doesn't go exactly the way they want it.
Coping with Asperger's. Okay.
One of the things that has really helped me cope with my Asperger's is having a routine and sticking to it. When my schedule is predictable, I have a lot less anxiety. Having consistency helps me be able to function better with other things like social situations.
Totally.
I would also reward myself when I have been consistently sticking to the routine. Rewards really help motivate me. Another thing that's really helped me is trying to stay positive. And I know it sounds kind of cheesy, but I put positivity into my routine. So I'll have a time to sit down and write all the things that day that were good and awesome.
Gratitude, yeah.
After I was diagnosed, I started seeing my therapist more and more, mostly to help improve with being social. Also, I started going to a group therapy session over at the Prairie Clinic in Geneva. It does kind of help me with communicating with others.
What I find helpful to myself is thinking positive, because a positive attitude is attractive and will help me find more friends and will make me less frustrated with myself, which in turn could help me succeed.
I think it's a lot about being kind to yourself and also trying to you know, when they're talking about like having a positive attitude, like I think it's more along the lines of treating yourself like a friend. You know, you know what you, even if a social situation goes bad, you know what you intended, you know what you meant, even if it wasn't interpreted in that way and resulted in some unfavorable interactions. You know, just reminding yourself that, you know, your perception is what you were trying to say is true. And being kind to yourself, I think, is a real big one that I think a lot of us can have some issues with. And I think maybe to a certain degree, having a little bit of a, you know, self-advocacy kind of mindset towards various things in life, I think can be very, very helpful. You know, advocating for your own preferences and feeling okay in doing that. And it's a very hard skill, I think, to develop. And I'm not saying that I'm perfect at it. In fact, you know, a lot of times I can struggle when it comes to self-advocating for that very reason, that people just don't relate and people don't understand. But some people do, you know, and I try to focus on interactions with people who just kind of naturally get on with my communication style, don't make as many judgments about me. I try to focus on those people, you know, and not particularly just about every interaction that I have in life, because I mean, most people are just, you know, not willfully ignorant, but ignorant to a certain degree. Definitely not good at being kind to myself. I agree. They seem to be repeating what is being said to them rather than expressing their own opinion and thoughts. What you mean, the people in this documentary? I mean, it may be just a result of them scripting what they wanted to say to a certain degree. Used to be not good at detecting sarcasm or picking up subtext, but I trained my brain over years to adjust to certain things. But it's still like to keep to myself. It's a juxtaposition. I can understand sarcasm, but not with people that I don't know. So I need to understand, because sarcasm is not just one thing. Like, you can't just point out sarcasm in every individual. And in fact, I'd say most holistic individuals don't get it completely right every single time. It really depends on the person, how they deliver it. So if I know someone quite well, I know how they do sarcasm. So it's a bit easy for me to tell. Yeah, we got to be kind to ourselves, you know, and also, you know, feel somewhat empowered to live our lives as an autistic person, not feel the constant need to sort of conform and please and sort of bend to the will of every neurotypical that we come across, you know. Not in like a sort of a egotistical way, but just a measured way, you know, just with an understanding that it's just not going to work with people all the time. Personally, positivity doesn't help me because it feels like I'm invalidating how I actually feel. Yes, 100%, honey. That's what I'm trying to get at. I have trouble being kind to myself as if I'm being a good friend. It's not one size fits all. No, I'm not saying that it's an easy thing to do. And I think I don't mean like fully, but you know, I think a certain level of taking care of yourself and being sort of your own friend to some degree, or having somewhat of a mindset like that, can help you, particularly in very difficult situations. Because it can be hard, because not everybody does understand you. It's just kind of the nature of being different. But I think you've got to, if no one's around you filling that role, you've got to try and fill that role for yourself sometimes. What is unmasking when you are so used to masking, especially being polite? It's a very complex thing. It's very dependent on the person. But masking is an element of social camouflage. There's different elements like masking, assimilation, compensation. It's talked about very loosely in the autistic community, and it means a lot of different things to lots of different people. But I do have a video on that if you want to go check it out. It's in my Autism University playlist. Find it hard to be kind to myself, yeah. I find that a lot with, you know, talking to other autistic people. I experience it myself as well. It's hard to be kind to yourself. It is difficult. It can put a lot of pressure on ourselves to meet certain expectations and standards that society has of us. Very difficult sometimes.
I think what was most helpful for me at the very beginning was being able to do performances.
Prediction! They're not even asking permission from the bottom.
I think what helps me mostly is reading the scripts and reading dialogue-heavy books. I'm able to more understand the rules of English better than my English teachers could have taught me. It really helped me understand stories and how people talk. And if I can understand how people talk in all circumstances, for one, it's able to make me better to act, but two, it's also able to help me more fluently transverse my own feelings to people.
Interesting.
I really like to go into the forest, hiking, walking, hunting especially. I really like hunting.
God, I did not expect that.
A switch gets...
It's not a view that I'm very used to seeing. As a UK person, he's just carrying like this sniper-looking piece of equipment. My God, that guy's a menace. Hide your kids, hide your wife, hide your kids. He's on the hunt.
Switched when I'm in the woods. I go from, societal, civilized person to feeling more like part of the woods. And it feels like all of my senses are a little sharper when I'm in the woods compared to when I'm
not laughing at him. I'm just thinking about the gun. And I'm comparing him in my brain to Predator, which he's not trying to do. It's very odd for a person from the UK to see someone holding a firearm in the woods.
When you're in society, there's just so much stimuli that you can't have sharp senses. If you do, you're going to get overwhelmed with it. But when you're in the woods, there's not a lot going on. So you can allow your senses to be a little sharper. One thing that's really helped has been meeting Alyssa, because up until that point, I didn't know anybody else with Asperger's that was my age. But when I started talking to her, I realized, you know what? I'm not the only person like this. This is kind of neat. Over the months of talking to her, I think I have learned a lot about myself, really.
Matt is seeing the bean for the first time.
Really shiny.
Since Matt had never been to Illinois before, I decided to show him around. We went to Chicago, visited some shops, and just hung out. While Matt was visiting, I decided to throw a pool party for all the Aspies that I knew. I wanted to see how well we'd all get along with each other.
Oh, here likes music! Because I have speakers if you want to plug in the iPod thing. Katie's got first dibs though.
Okay, this next party.
I just gotta say, I'm marveling at her abilities to just organize things like this. It's not something that I've ever done. That's one skill that I have not done.
Do that again. I knew there would be one guy who did that.
Something about other Aspies that interests me is that because our brains are wired differently, most of us make connections in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
But just like neurotypicals, no two Aspies are the same. So each of us has our own unique thinking patterns. So
that whole sort of divergent thinking that we talk about. Also the lateral thinking. I love the lateral thinking that autistic people it just seems to be very prevalent among autistic people, this skill of lateral thinking. Basically, lateral thinking is having the ability of tying two seemingly unrelated concepts together through a certain thread, sort of making connections laterally between topics. I think it does a lot for us in terms of innovating in certain ways, our skills in innovating. Could organize something like that. That's one of the reasons I think I'm extroverted. You should throw us a party, Keita. We should all go for a pool party. I'm good at organizing, but after hosting, I couldn't do it again for a couple of months. Yeah, I can imagine. I don't mind hosting if someone else organizes. I think it's just the organization aspect of it. Making sure everyone's coming. That's the issue as being an adult, Lateral thinking is why I'm so good at computer science and project management and product development. Very interesting. So this is a very important point to make. We are just potentially different from each other as holistics are. Yeah, 100%. I mean, definitely do not want to come across like I'm saying that every single autistic person is this way, but you know, it's very difficult to speak, to sort of strike the balance between speaking broadly and speaking specifically, because if you speak too broadly, it becomes something which is not perhaps related to autism. You speak too specifically about autism being this way, then you sort of isolate people who are not like you and different and have different traits and such. But yeah, I mean, everyone's very different, both with their experiences of autism and also their personality, their upbringing, different other sort of factors involved in that. 100%.
If someone asked you what Asperger's and autism is in general,
In
how would you explain it?
It is a different status of mind. It's a different form of thinking. For some people, it's thinking in words. For others, it's thinking in pictures. For others, it's thinking in ideas. Asperger's, as it is frankly identifying how a person thinks and noting that it is different than the general population. Other ways that I think more recently is the way in which a computer thinks, with if block statements. If apples is equal to 0, then tell mom, get more apples, or something along those lines.
So he thinks in coding. I really like autistic people's ability to like explain things from like the lens of their own special interest, you know. Always makes some really interesting analogies and metaphors and such. You do it all the time, Busy Octopus, with your lateral thinking? Very good. I like to provide my point of view here in case anybody else is like me. Feels good to actually relate to some humans. Oh. Toko Thomas, I didn't think you were saying we were all like, yeah, it's all good. What was I going to say? I was going to say something. There was something that I was going to communicate. Yeah, I suppose one question that I want to ask you guys, I don't know if, I mean, I hold back on it a little bit nowadays because I'm not too sure if it resonates with most autistic people or not, but I know that specifically for myself, I used to be incredibly logical and sort of step by step with pretty much anything that I did in life. I've talked about it a little bit in the past, and people have told me that it's not the same in that way for everybody. So there's a lot of variance in it, but I'd be interested to know what your experiences are with it, because that's definitely like how my brain works. You know, I'm very like, in order for me to integrate and use something, I need to understand something logically. Like, if it doesn't make sense to me, I find it very hard to accept, you know. Need very clear step-by-step instructions. Yeah, me too. Logic is key. Even when it comes to socializing, I mean, it took me a while to understand the holistic social world, but I eventually did, but it just required me to understand a lot of complex psychological and philosophical concepts in order to understand and integrate them and like pick up on them and sort of relate to them in a different way. Because I never really understood, like, a lot of the ways that I viewed other people around me at school was that they're kind of these emotionally sort of impulsive driven creatures. I didn't really understand how they did stuff so quickly and made decisions so quickly. So I was like, do you know, how do you know that you want to do something without thinking about it? But, you know, a lot of people just go based on gut instinct and like what makes the most sense to them, you know. I'm 100% logic first, but as an adult, I started to incorporate people's emotions and state of mind in logic. Yeah. But even with that to a certain degree, like with the emotional side, it, you know, only really came to me sort of, I only really understood it once I understood the underlying logic behind it. That's why I'm so interested in psychology. Still annoys me that people are not logical. You're like that too, Katya? How are you feeling anyway, Katya? I don't think I asked you, sort of after your diagnosis, how are you feeling at the moment? For me, it's a complexity of other mental states or a lot of emotional factors I can't predict, so it's hard to understand them. You're logic based as well? Yeah, polar as well. Okay. You can't stay. Look forward to hearing later. Reading the comments. Hope you're doing well, Tom. Thank you, Malappropriate. Much appreciated, my friends. See you around. Yep. You got the official diagnostic report. Yep. She did. They did indeed. From what I know. Is that true? Maybe I'm misrepresenting. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, when I was younger, I used to think that emotions had no impact on me. But as I grew older, I realized that's just a result of me being unaware that emotions were affecting my personality. And like how I, not my personality, how I presented. It doesn't take a stimulant, no ADHD. Yeah. You say that I'm metazapine? Yes, I am indeed. Yeah, I can't handle the weight gain. 100%. I am just autistic myself. Not ADHD. Just got one. Haven't been officially been diagnosed yet. I had my cognitive testing tomorrow, and I have to turn in paperwork the doctor wanted me and my caretaker to fill out along with the stuff my mum mailed. Okay, sorry that I misrepresented that. I think I remember you talking about like it went well for you. You know, it felt like it went well. Albuquerque says, Thomas, in the UK, can a psychologist give an official autism diagnosis? My country, it needs to be psychiatrist. I don't know the specifics of it. I do know that occupational therapists can also diagnose. I think it's just anybody who's gone through the process of learning how to diagnose people with a particular condition or difference. But yeah, in my mind, psychiatrists, they're able to prescribe medication, but psychologists, they're more of the talking therapy side of things. I'm not wrong. Let us continue. 10
I mostly think visually, like in pictures or imaginatively. That usually works with stories that I come up with, or in real life, I pretty much imagine how my day is going to work out. The real main positive aspect to my Asperger's is how I am good at memorization. I can memorize things pretty quickly and easily. Usually tends to be things that I'm interested in.
Fighter and med mage, go to the weapon store. Can I help you, boys? Now, what was it that I wanted?
Yeah, I'd like 2 Excaliburs.
If he didn't have Asperger's, then I probably would not have the same imagination as I do now. I mean, I wouldn't be working on the story that I'm currently working on, or any of that.
I like that they're bringing that up, because quite often, well, even in the criteria around autism, it's sort of seen as being sort of lacking, sort of misinterpreted as lacking imagination. But in my experience, a lot of like the interests of autistic people tend to be along the lines of the fictional. So it's great that she's bringing this up. Funny, she's talking about memory right now. Yeah. I don't have very good memory recall. But if someone brings up something, my brain absorbs a lot. So if someone brings up something, my brain will churn out things related to that topic, but I don't really have much ability to, like, if someone said, recall everything that you know about this, I would have a difficulty with it. But if someone started talking about something I can recall things that I've learnt quite easily, but it's yeah. Do you know what I mean? It's hard to really explain. It doesn't really give me much confidence in my ability to, like, memorize and understand things, but I generally do absorb quite a bit. It's just recalling it on the spot based on very, questions. This is one of the issues that I had, particularly at uni with exams. Talk about information. What do you want to know about information? God, there's so many things that I can talk about. And then I try and cram in everything that I know, sort of splurge out on the page, just everything about information. And they only want me to talk specifically about one piece of inflammation stuff. They could have just told me that. Give me a number and how many inflammation topics you want me to talk about. You come off as super smart if that helps your confidence, Thomas. Oh, thank you. Let me get my glasses. Just to make myself look a bit more intellectual. God, that was loud. Sorry about that. And I beat the microphone as well. Glasses in session.
I don't think like anybody else. I have always thought of myself as creative and curious. I often analyze why things are the way they are, and why people are the way they are.
If I were to describe the way I think, it would mainly be visually and sequentially. The best comparison would probably be a music video, because it is visual, you see images, and they're always in a certain sequence. Unlike with social situations where I might be really slow with coming up with a response, my actual thinking patterns can be really fast. I can come up with ideas on the fly. I'll have, images going like really, really fast through my head. Sometimes it's a little too fast, so to manage that, I often would talk to myself to get it out so it won't be bouncing around in my head.
I relate.
Now, Matt is a different story. I believe his thought processes are actually closer to neurotypical than me and Katie's because he thinks more verbally.
I've heard a lot about people on the spectrum, how a lot of them will think with like pictures or images in their head.
I think this is something related to the book that Temple Grandin made quite a while ago on thinking in pictures. They actually did a follow-up book, which was actually talking about the fact that it's not necessarily true. Some people are very focused on the language aspect of things. Some people are very focused on sort of thinking in pictures and sort of making things into diagrams and stuff. And it's kind of the whole sort of learning style stuff. I don't know if there's any correlation between the style of what they like to think about is, but don't really know how I think, really. How do I think? I can think in very high detail of like scenes. If I'm trying to do a bit of writing for my fictional book, I can very accurately picture like all the different sensory elements that might be going on in the scene. So the glistening of like snow and things of that nature. But I'm not really sure, really. Yeah. Temple Grandin is now talking about all the styles in a new book. Yeah, indeed.
Their head. But for me, it's more of a verbal thought process. It's like almost like talking to myself in my head, about what I need to do, what needs to be done, what hasn't been done, that kind of thing. And it's kind of like a GPS. It will like guide me towards an objective. Well, as a generality, Aspies tend to view the world a little differently than neurotypical people without Asperger's. So a lot of times we can come up with alternate solutions to a problem that a neurotypical person may not have thought of. But the same is also true for NTs. They may think of a solution that we don't think of.
Yeah.
So I think
diversity of thought.
It kind of takes both sides working together to come up with like a joint solution at times. Somebody described it to me once as an Aspie and a neurotypical standing side by side, and they hear the beating of hooves on the ground. And the neurotypical person will automatically say, those are horses. And the Aspie might say, well, who's to say it's not zebras?
Ooh. Imagination.
I've heard that massive amounts of imagination is pretty common among creative girls on the spectrum. And that's the reason why Katie and I relate so well. We both have these vast inner worlds, but just calling them vast is an understatement.
While my neural thinking tends to be a bit more conversational, my imagination tends to be a bit more visual. I can't remember a day in my life where I wasn't coming up with something. If I had to describe my stories, it'd have to be like having a TV inside my head. All the stories that I have are like shows, and they have crossovers constantly, and the genres are absolutely endless. A lot of fun.
I think one of the interesting things that's propped up from me trying to write a fictional story is that I can't, like, trying to plan out a story, it never really works for me because it kind of takes me out of the world a little bit to plan it. I always feel like I'm trying to meet these sort of boundaries that I'm putting on the story. So I like to just write. I usually, if I have written a note I'm wanting to write again on a day, I'll read what I've written before and sort of try and picture sort of the storyline. I have a rough idea in my brain. I have some ideas, but I try to not try to put too many bounds. It's exactly how my hyperphantasia works. Use that gesture from SpongeBob reference so often. That made me laugh, yeah. I wish, I don't know if it'll get copyrighted, but I'd really like to play Stadium Rave. That would be great as a button. I'm not using the buttons today, I probably should be. Yes, I'm that way, and it's so detailed in my head, it's hard to explain my thoughts to people. feel like my knowledge in my head cannot be understood in human language. Like I have an alien brain. Yeah. Really enjoying this, but I have to go. Just got dinner ready. No problem at all, Paula. It's been lovely to have you here. I hope you have an okay interaction with your family.
They are pretty much what keep me sane throughout most of my life. When I'm really stressed out, they can either calm me down or help me to concentrate. If I just want to clear my mind, I find a story that's the most comforting at the time, and then I just go there and play around. They keep me centered in a way.
Escapism.
Could imagine not ever having them.
Throughout my life, I've always had a huge imagination. In fact, a lot of times my imagination might seem a little more real than reality because I'm so engrossed in it a lot. Also, because I'm visual, I can imagine things around me in the actual environment. I've actually been building a sort of inner fantasy world in my head since I was about 17. I call it Vale. It's a really beautiful place.
CGI.
There's one character in particular that I picture a lot. His name is Seamus, and he's an angel.
No.
And sometimes by picturing him with me, it helps me get through things that I might be struggling with. Like if I'm lonely or if I'm really anxious during a test, he'll just be there.
Imaginary friends? Do you guys have imaginary friends? This is going to be a juicy one.
Sometimes adolescents with Asperger's have difficulty transitioning from that adolescent period into adulthood, and I believe that parents can play a primary role helping them with that transition.
That's actually one of the programs that I used to work on when I was in that sort of social inclusion organization. We had a program actually for helping disabled and autistic people transition from teenagehood to adulthood. It's a very, very difficult transition that can often take longer for us. And I think if, a lot of people, from what I've gathered from previous streams that we've done, also from my own experiences, there seems to be a lot of societal pressures, nowadays that can really get us down if we're not reaching certain life milestones at the rate that other people do. Never had an imaginary friend or alternative reality? I definitely did. I mean, for a long time I lived in some pretty heavy states of delusion. I would call them delusion, but they never really impacted me. Well, I suppose they did at one point, but yeah, who knows? I spent years imagining my little prince from a children's book. No, Thomas, you are my imaginary friend. Oh, I don't know if that's a nice thing. I mean, I'm not imaginary. I'm a real person. Don't have imaginary friends, but when I imagine a conversation with a friend, I actually see them almost like there's a hologram in my room. Very interesting. What age, Thomas? Probably when the anxiety, depression stuff started. Probably like 14 to about 17. Yeah, prove it. I am actually just an AI-generated autistic man. Can you imagine? Just the best deep fake ever. It's not a real person. I'm too inconsistent
Although I had
to
known
be
Katie and her family for
AI-generated.
years, it wasn't until this conversation with Carol that I realized just how much she helped Katie and how far Katie has come to improve her functioning skills.
Once we brought her home for homeschool in October of 3rd grade, the first year we just kind of had to save Katie. She was in a very, very difficult emotional time. It was the challenges of the school schedule, the school environment, not being able to learn at the schedule that the other kids were. They were getting into a much more 3rd grade. They're getting into a much more testing environment. So she just had amazing anxiety and sadness. I wouldn't say depression, but she really was at that point. So we went to museums. We went and adventured. We just did all kinds of stuff her first year. We just kind of continued to expand some of her opportunities for independence. The library has always been a big thing. As she got older, she would print out a map from online, and then we would draw the map, and then we would ride the bike path that we set out for her to get to the library, she would get to the library by herself, and that was a huge thing for her. Then she would start going on errands for us. I mean, I paid a ton more for milk at the neighborhood gas station, but it was something that Katie could do for us. And let me tell you, it was helpful to have her run over and get a gallon of milk if we were out of something. She loved to be of productive service to the family.
So Alyssa went from a really positive middle school experience where the staff and the teachers understood her and they supported her to a high school experience in a different district that didn't quite know what to do with Alyssa.
Yeah.
They didn't quite understand where she fit in socially or academically. And so my husband and I and Alyssa, we weighed our options and we made the decision to homeschool. And over the course of Alyssa's homeschool experience, she was able to be involved in 4-H, which helped her with her leadership skills. And then she was also involved in a homeschool co-op, and that really helped her with her social interactions. There were two notable experiences that really helped Alyssa gain independence. The first was when she turned 16, she wanted to apply for a job at Target. So both she and I applied for the Target positions, and they allowed me to be a job coach for the first several months, which really helped her transition into the work.
This lady is such a gem. You can just tell. Like, yeah, what a cool mom. I know, right? Oh, I'm so happy for people like that. She seems very like soft spoken as well. You see, she's a very good speaker actually. I'd be surprised if they didn't do a lot of speaking. Hello, Zafi. Welcome. How are you doing? Welcome to the stream. Andrew Huberman talks a lot about sleeping habits and vices. Interesting. Yeah, I'm liking this lady. Seems like a nice one.
Work environment. Another notable experience was when Alyssa entered a transition program 2 years before college. She emerged as a leader among her peers, and it really helped her gain her independence.
Oh, God. Little mate.
Nowadays, I work as a bagger at a grocery store. I find it a lot of fun seeing the different types of people and interacting with them. And my greatest joy in life nowadays is trying to make people smile. To most people, bagging might be, okay, yeah, you bag people things in a grocery bag. Big whoop. For me, it's talking with them. It's not just bagging. It's bagging to make them like
talking.
If they want their bags bagged a certain way, then I bag it that way. All in all, as you can tell, my social skills have just grown. And I love it. I get a high off of this. But at the end of the day, when I come back home, I am out of it.
Yeah.
I just flop on the bed and I am out.
I know that there's somebody sort of within my family system who is also autistic, and they have a very customer-facing service job. And I was talking to them. I was like, "Are you sure that you want to go for this type of job? It's going to really, really impact your social battery. You do know that, right?" I mean, speaking for myself, I mean, I don't really know to what extent. I don't think streaming impacts my social battery. I'm not sure. Maybe it does a tiny bit, just a teeny bit. But I think it more impacts my desire to communicate. Because I don't think it affects my social battery, but I don't feel like as much need to sort of speak to people, like share things, or like, you know, because I'm just kind of get it all out when I do my streams and videos. Doesn't impact my social battery. That's why I love so much watching these and chatting in chat. Sensory, I couldn't handle it. Yeah, I mean, my God. Catcher says teaching nearly killed me. Thought I was going insane. Couldn't hold my meltdown in towards the end. Yeah, I could only handle it for about a year. That was me. That was me done and dusted. There's too much like uncertainty just from like how chaotic the school environment can be, but also, you know, if you're working around kids, you really have to put a lot of effort into the way that you communicate with them, which can be very, very draining to one's social battery, you know. And then you don't particularly get your social needs met in the ways that you'd want to through like friends or sort of families or like clubs or anything like that. Thomas, you taught? I did indeed for a year in a special needs school. For some of it I worked one-to-one with kids inside mainstream schools. I wasn't a proper teacher. I was a teaching assistant, but it was primary school age. So a lot of the stuff a lot of the time actually, I'd sort of, if the kid wasn't sort of managing to stay very concentrated due to the sensory and social environment, we'd sort of go off somewhere a little bit quieter, and I'd sort of teach them different aspects of the subject. Apparently I read by autistic people are prone to sleep and respiratory disorders like sleep apnea. Interesting. I know sleep is a big issue for us. Didn't know about respiratory stuff though. You do sales and it's hard. Yeah, I can imagine that. My God. It's a game for me to see how much I can cram in my car. Yeah. I also did ABA therapy, unfortunately. I did go off a bit on what they wanted me to do sometimes. Yeah, I remember you talking about that when we watched that video. Yeah. I mean, to a lot of people, when they get into that, they don't do much reading, and they're not really aware of like what a lot of people in the autistic community think about it, and they just want to genuinely sort of help the kids, So I never make any, wide judgmental judgments about, people who have done that, because I understand, like, even to a certain extent, I didn't know about it until people told me, I didn't even know that the Speaks organization was something that people didn't like until I started doing the light it up blue Instagram posts. I didn't realize that people didn't like it. I got lots of people sending me angry messages. I just thought I was doing something nice, but I get it now, but I was just ignorant about it at the time.
I get. That took a good 3/4 of my energy. The rest of it was going to bagging.
Yeah.
So as much as I might seem like I have all the energy in the world, as soon as I get home, I am out.
When you feel safe.
That's how it is for Asperger's.
Go.
We do not have the endurance that most people have. So social interactions, let's go climb Mount Everest, shall we?
Right now I'm going to a small Christian university, and I'm majoring in film studies.
Nice.
I also feel very independent. I have my own dorm room. I do my own cooking and cleaning and shopping. And I really like that because it makes me feel like a responsible adult.
I've already started going into the audio production industry.
What do you mean? Program, garage band.
I want to play guitar and go into audio mixing. I have a few music projects on the internet. And that's what I want to do with my life.
One thing that I would like people to know about Asperger's is that it's not really a disability, I don't think. We may not have the best social skills, but what we lack in social skills, we tend to make up for with academic skill or vocational skill. We excel at what we're good at. I've always been an honor student academically. I plan on getting a degree in geological sciences. I believe that when I took an IQ test, it registered somewhere around 129, which would be about a little over 1.5 standard deviations above average.
Aspies have...
I think the test that I did, it wasn't an official IQ test, but I did one of the online, like, Mensa ones. I think I scored about 134, 138, something like that. Mostly because of the logic, but I really fell down when it came to the mathematical aspect of it. I was really, really bad at that. You're only 126. That's not only. Don't put only before that. That's... I mean, IQ's a funny one, isn't it? Like, it's not always correlated with how good you are at doing things, Respiratory problems, something that I need. I'll mentally prepare myself for every interaction. Figgy says I spend long periods on my own after socializing, or I will have meltdowns. Man in my 40s screaming and shouting can be taken the wrong way at my age. Yeah. So many people in autism communities are 130 plus. Yeah, but I don't know. I don't trust it fully, I also think that, I mean, it's the best normalized sort of test that people can do to get a measure of someone's IQ, like intelligence, but it's not flawless, that's for sure. It's just something that can be standardized to a certain degree, you know. Yeah, it's yeah. I don't think about it too much. It's not. I mean, people who do like that, I don't know. I get it. I just maybe if they took out the mathematics side of things, like the things that I'm not very good at, because it kind of like my difficulties with on the ball. Like I'm good with algebra because it's logical based, but mathematics, like numbers, just doing that on the spot very, very quickly, not something that I'm very good at. So it really drags down my score a lot. But the logic side, I'm like, dang, like instant. So spiky profiles, you know, doesn't really give you a good representation of how intelligent you are if, you know, you're really, really bad in one area, but in the other areas you're like really good. So I suppose that's one of the difficulties of it. Hello, Woodshed. It's good to see you. Woodshed, would you like to come on to my podcast on Friday? Do a live podcast with me? I was going to ask you after the stream, now that you're here. I don't really find those tests useful for real life functioning. Yeah, exactly. You know, thought the tests were fun during the assessment. Everyone with autism is different. This is why some autistic people need more support than others, 100%. It's a measure of how well you do in the IQ test, which tries to isolate variables. There are several errors in each one of those steps. 100% Albuquerque. You hit the nail on the head with that.
This ability to do something called hyper-focusing, where it's basically the same as focusing, but compared to the normal person, it's much more intense, and they focus on very specific things. So when they get interested in something, they are really interested in it. Like, if they like airplanes, they might know everything there is to know about airplanes, or maybe even a certain type of airplane, and how it's built, and the history of that airplane. This can actually eventually lead to them having a really great career that they love. If there's something that they really like, and that is their job to do that, they're going to do really good at it.
That is really, really good point. That's like, I think if you can turn your special interests into a job, if you're possible, like if I paste it over and over, maybe Thomas will read it. Which one? What was I going to say? Yes. Braining. I think also with IQ, there's you're factoring in. There's a speed element of IQ as well, which is not very favorable to the processing speeds of a lot of autistic people. That can be a factor as well. A lot of different factors that make it not the most favorable thing. But what they were talking about, making special interests like into a job, 100%. Like if you can do that, great. I think that's like, you know, the sort of the core of harnessing your sort of autistic strengths, focusing on what you're good at, you know, trying to do less of what you find difficult and over sort of requiring too much energy, and trying to focus on the things that you can do with ease and the things that you enjoy and can focus on. But be careful with hyperfocus, because it's not all a positive. I've been in many states where I've been very, very hyper-focused on something, and I've forgotten to eat, I've forgotten to drink, I've stopped myself from going to the bathroom because I'm just like, can't transition from one thing to another. So sometimes hyper-focusing on something for long periods of time can be a negative thing. Really depends on the context. Like, it can really sort of make things quite difficult.
They might still struggle with the social environment of having a job, but they'll be good at what they actually do.
With a lot of the kids and young adults, I talk about that you have superpowers. It's just a matter of learning how to harness them, using them to your advantage. You can use them for good, or you can use them for not so good. When you use them for good, the sky's the limit. I read another article not long ago, and it said it hypothesized that 90% of the technological inventions we have today come from minds of those that are on the spectrum, which I think is probably true.
Innovation.
I think it's really important for the business world to know that there's many, many people with autism spectrum disorders that are very capable. You know, just the way that they're wired, they're can be very detail oriented and just really good at finding errors. And I know there's some companies that have really capitalized on that, and they have hired people with autism specifically because of how their brains work, and it's made them much more productive.
Yeah, that's one of the real annoying things that I found with trying to You know, with that sort of inclusion job that I had before, one of the goals was to try and increase the amount of employment opportunities for autistic people. And a lot of the mindset and the perspectives that businesses have of autistic people is that it's more along the lines of a charity effort, which is not what it's like. It can actually be, and they have shown in studies that it's been beneficial to actually have autistic people as part of a workplace. Later, everybody. Oh, are you off, Neurageezer? It's good to have you around, mate. I'll see you later. How do you maintain your large muscles that you build at the gym if you sometimes forget to eat? Honestly, to be honest, I don't really focus much on diet. Usually I make up for it in the evening if I don't eat. What? What's up, Katya? The doctor said cognitive tests will be fun on an iPad. What the heck is that going to make me do and why? Is that the one that you wanted me to look at? He dreams about bench pressing sumo wrestlers that keeps him buff. I think just in general, trying to focus on eating high protein things as much as I can and just really dialing in the gym. I could probably do a lot better in terms of bodybuilding if I paid a lot more attention to my diet, but I don't know, it's just not really interesting to me. That put me in timeout. Marvin's telling you off. Got 3 minutes left of this, guys.
I guess the main thing to mention would be don't treat it as a disease. Many people keep asking, is there a cure for this? I go, why? If you talk to people, employers of the computer field, they say that Asperger's is one of the greatest things that have happened to them. Like, they get their best employees from Asperger's.
If I were to give any advice to an Aspie in general, I would say get to know yourself and your needs and realize that you do have limitations and try to work around them. Don't be ashamed of them. Get help for them if you need the help. Like if you think counseling will help you, or maybe a mentor for social skills, accept help because...
One sec. Oh, was that a question? I thought it was just one of those questions that were not questions. I can't remember what they're called. The cognitive tests are a part of autism diagnosis. They just are, from what I gathered.
That's going to make life a little bit easier. Also, embrace your strengths, or as Dr. Wahlberg would say, your superpowers, because all Aspies, even though we have deficits, we have superpowers.
So if I were to give a message to all the Aspies, I'd have to say, don't give up, keep trudging forward, and find your happy place.
Mm-hmm.
And if life gets tough, then it's gonna get tough. You just gotta try and be tougher.
Don't let what other people say bother you. Be proud of who you are and accept yourself for all of your differences than what society thinks is normal. If I were given a choice between having Asperger's syndrome and not having it, I would choose...
Volunteer related. Okay, there's no... Well, that was a great documentary, and their film degree definitely shows that. I think they've just edged about 5k more views than my own documentary. It's much better than mine. much better. But please, if you have enjoyed this, go and actually check out the original video. Give it a like, give them a subscribe, give them a comment, just to boost it in the algorithm, because a lot of time and effort has been put into making this. It's very, very expertly done. So thank you very much to everyone who created this, and I hope my covering of this pretty old film is wanted, liked. I do also think Alyssa has a blog as well. If you look at the description of their video, they've got a blog, they've got a website, Facebook, X. Don't know if they still use it or not. Yeah, Alyssa Huber Films. Really encourage you to go check out that stuff and give them some love, you know. Here's my video. My very old video. But yeah, amazing, awesome film. A lot of really great things to talk about. And although it's a little bit dated in terminology, I think there's a lot of useful stuff in there.